Most people think peace comes after we finally stop feeling so much. But what if it begins the moment we stop running from what's already inside us? There's a quiet exhaustion that settles in when you've spent years trying to outrun sadness, fear, or anger without anyone noticing. You smile, you function, you tell yourself you're fine, and somehow the noise only grows louder in the silence. This story is for the part of you that's tired of fighting a battle no one else can see. Imagine discovering that nothing inside you is broken, only unheard, that the feelings you've been trying to silence were never meant to disappear, just to be understood. There's a gentle way back to yourself, one that doesn't demand strength or perfection. It starts with something almost disarmingly simple, something most people overlook because it feels too quiet to matter. And once you see it, you may wonder how you ever missed it before. So if you've been carrying an invisible weight, unsure how much longer you can hold it together, stay here a little while. Not because this story will fix you, but because it might help you loosen your grip. You don't have to believe anything yet. Just listen and notice what stirs inside. Somewhere along the way, you may feel a small shift, like a door opening where there used to be only walls, and that shift might be all it takes to begin finding your way back to peace. He had grown used to carrying feelings the way one carries a box that hums when no one's looking. On the outside, he seemed steady, the sort of person who nodded and said he was fine. Inside, though, the box trembled with all the sadness and sharp-edged fear he never let out. Some nights he pressed a pillow over it, as if silence could seep through fabric. It didn't, of course. It only made the quiet feel heavier, like air before a storm. He couldn't remember when he'd decided that strong people didn't open their boxes. Maybe it was after the day someone laughed at his tears, or the evening he was told to move on. So he learned to smile with tired eyes and change the subject when his chest tightened. It was exhausting work, holding the lid down while pretending his hands were free. Sometimes he wondered why loneliness felt louder in crowded rooms than in empty ones. There were moments, small, almost invisible, when the box rattled at the worst times. A careless remark, a message left unanswered, a door closed a bit too firmly. His jaw would stiffen, his throat would burn, and he'd excuse himself like a polite ghost. In the mirror, he'd whisper, "Get it together," as though he were both warden and prisoner. Oddly enough, the command never brought peace, only a deeper kind of fatigue. He believed, quietly and stubbornly, that one day he'd fix whatever was broken inside. If he could just organize his thoughts, outrun the memories, fold the feelings neatly away. People admired how composed he was, which made it harder to admit the truth. The box wasn't organized at all. It was swelling, metal sides bowing outward, and he feared that if anyone saw inside, they'd step back as if from something contagious. One evening, sitting alone while the world carried on without him, he loosened his grip by accident. The humming softened, not gone, just less desperate, like a sigh behind a door. It startled him enough to place his palm gently on the lid instead of forcing it shut. A strange thought flickered through his mind. What if peace wasn't in winning this fight? He didn't know it yet, but that small pause was already changing the way the box behaved. In the days that followed, he noticed something peculiar about the box. Whenever he stopped wrestling with it and simply sat nearby, the vibrations eased on their own. It was unsettling at first, like discovering a locked door had been open all along. He kept expecting the noise to surge back the moment he relaxed his guard. Instead, the quiet lingered, cautious but real, as if testing whether it was welcome. He began experimenting in secret, the way one does with fragile hopes. When sadness brushed against him, he didn't shove it away. He just named it softly. "Ah, there you are," he murmured once, feeling slightly foolish and oddly relieved. The box responded with a faint warmth, not the angry shaking he was used to. It dawned on him that feelings might be less like enemies and more like weather passing through. Control had always seemed like the noble path, the respectable way to survive storms. Yet control had left him weary, jaw aching from all the unspoken resistance. Now, allowing a feeling to exist felt almost like setting down a heavy bag mid-journey. Nothing dramatic happened, no fireworks, no grand transformation, just a gentler breathing, as though his ribs finally remembered how to expand. He started to suspect that emotions grew louder only when locked in darkness. Like children knocking on a door, they weren't trying to destroy the house, just to be seen. When he listened, even briefly, the urgency faded into something understandable. The box no longer seemed like a threat, but a messenger with poor manners. And for the first time, Curiosity began to outweigh his fear of what might spill out. One quiet afternoon, he rested his hand on the lid and didn't push down at all. The humming settled into a steady rhythm, almost companionable. He realized peace might not be something he forced into existence. Maybe it was something that appeared when he stopped arguing with what was already there. Still, he wondered how long this fragile truce would last, once life pressed harder again. Most people knew him as the dependable one, the calm voice in tense moments. He had perfected a composed nod, a small reassuring smile that asked for nothing back. No one saw how carefully he arranged his expressions, like furniture hiding a cracked wall. The box was always there, tucked behind his ribs, humming under pressed shirts and polite laughter. If anyone noticed his distance, they assumed he was simply thoughtful, not quietly overwhelmed. He avoided questions that wandered too close to the truth. "How are you, really?" felt like a trapdoor he couldn't risk stepping on. So he kept answers light, almost playful, tossing them out like breadcrumbs. At night, though, the day replayed itself with uncomfortable clarity. Every swallowed word and forced grin returned, tapping from inside the box. Sometimes the pressure escaped sideways in ways he couldn't predict. A minor inconvenience would sting as if it carried old wounds with it. He'd snap at himself afterward, ashamed of reactions that felt too large. In the mirror, he searched for the strong person everyone else seemed to see. All he found was someone tired of pretending the noise inside didn't exist. His greatest fear wasn't the feelings themselves, but what they might reveal. If he admitted he was hurting, would people look at him differently? Would strength dissolve the moment he stopped holding the lid shut? The thought alone made his chest tighten, fingers instinctively bracing the box again. Better to endure the strain, he told himself, than risk being seen as fragile. Yet the body has its own quiet ways of telling the truth. Headaches lingered, sleep came in shallow fragments, patience wore thin. Even his laughter felt borrowed, like something he'd return when no one watched. He sensed he couldn't keep living as both guard and prisoner forever. Still, he had no idea who he might become if he finally loosened his grip. One morning, after a night of restless turning, he imagined the box more clearly than ever. It wasn't small or harmless as he'd pretended, but heavy, iron-bound, warm to the touch. Fine cracks traced its surface, glowing faintly as if something inside pressed toward daylight. When he pictured his hands gripping the lid, his palms ached in sympathy. It struck him that he had been holding back a tide with nothing but tired fingers. The image stayed with him throughout the day, strangely vivid. While waiting in line, he sensed the box straining, a low vibration traveling through his chest. A sharp word from a stranger made the cracks glow brighter for a moment. He inhaled quickly, bracing, expecting the familiar surge of panic. Instead, he noticed how much effort it took to keep everything sealed. He wondered what would happen if he loosened his grip even slightly. Not to let everything spill out, just enough for the pressure to breathe. The thought frightened him, yet it carried a hint of relief too. Like opening a window during a storm, knowing rain might come in but air would move again. For a second, his shoulders dropped before he caught himself and tightened up. Later, alone at home, he placed a hand over his chest and closed his eyes. He pictured the box resting on a quiet table instead of locked in a vault. It still trembled, but the movement seemed less violent, almost tired. He whispered, half apologetic, "I know you're there," unsure who he was addressing. The room felt softer afterward, as if something inside had heard him. That night, he didn't force himself to sleep right away. He lay awake, imagining the lid unlatched but not yet lifted. The box no longer felt like an enemy, more like a burden waiting to be understood. He sensed that sooner or later, someone would need to show him how to open it safely. Until then, he hovered between fear and a cautious, unfamiliar hope. He met the old woman on a park bench he'd passed 100 times without noticing. She sat with the ease of someone who had nowhere urgent to be, feeding crumbs to birds. When he lowered himself onto the far end, the box inside him stirred, alert and uneasy. She didn't look at him right away, which oddly made staying feel possible. After a while, she said, almost to the pigeons, "You look like you've been carrying something heavy." He gave a polite shrug, the kind that usually ended conversations before they began. But she turned then, her gaze steady without being sharp, like still water. "You don't have to explain it," she added gently, brushing crumbs from her palms. The absence of curiosity felt kinder than questions would have. For reasons he couldn't name, his shoulders sagged as if they'd been waiting for permission. They sat in companionable silence, watching the birds argue over invisible prizes. The box vibrated, not angrily this time, just aware of being noticed. "It's strange," she said, tapping the bench lightly, "how things calm down when we stop wrestling them." He glanced at her, wondering how she could possibly know about his invisible burden. She smiled, not triumphant, just warm, as though recognizing an old story. She told him about a jar she once kept sealed so tightly that even sunlight couldn't touch what was inside. "It didn't preserve anything," she said softly. "It only made the contents sour." When she described loosening the lid and letting fresh air do its quiet work, his chest tightened. The box responded with a low hum, almost curious, like a child overhearing its name. He realized she wasn't offering solutions, only space for something unspoken to shift. As the sun dipped lower, she stood, brushing dust from her coat. "Come back tomorrow if you like," she said, as if inviting him to nothing in particular. He watched her walk away, surprised by the lightness that followed her absence. For the first time, the box felt less like a solitary burden and more like a shared secret. He sensed their next meeting might change how tightly he believed he had to hold on. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More 2 Bonus for you. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. When he returned the next day, she was already there. As if the bench remembered her shape, she greeted him with a nod, no fuss, just quiet recognition. For a while they watched the trees sway, leaves whispering in a language neither tried to translate. Finally, she said, "You don't open heavy things by force, you know." He felt the box stir, as though it too leaned closer to listen. She held out her hands, palms curved as if cradling something fragile. "Imagine giving it space instead of commands," she murmured. He closed his eyes, picturing the iron lid no longer clamped shut, but resting loosely. At once a slow warmth spread through his chest, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. The vibration softened, like a breath released after being held too long. "Nothing inside is trying to hurt you," she continued, voice steady as dusk. "It just wants room to move, the way a cramped limb aches until it can stretch." He pictured unlatching the box, just a fraction, enough for air to slip through. A tremor passed, then settled, the glow along the cracks dimming to a gentle pulse. He hadn't expected relief to feel so ordinary, almost shy. They practiced in silence, him breathing slowly, her presence like an anchor. Whenever fear flared, she simply tapped the bench once, a quiet reminder to soften. He realized acceptance wasn't dramatic or heroic. It was more like unclenching a fist. The box didn't burst open or spill chaos as he'd feared. Instead, it seemed to sigh, grateful for the small mercy of space. When he opened his eyes, the world looked subtly rearranged. Colors felt warmer, sounds less sharp around the edges. She smiled as if she'd been expecting this all along. "See?" she said gently. Feelings move when they're allowed to breathe. He wondered how many years he had spent guarding a door that only needed to be unlocked. In the days that followed, he began checking in with the box the way one checks the weather. Not to control it, just to know whether storms or clear skies were passing through. When a sharp memory surfaced, he whispered its name instead of pushing it back down. The lid would tremble, then settle, like a kettle cooling once removed from heat. He found it strange how quickly intensity softened when it wasn't treated like a threat. Vulnerability arrived in small, awkward moments rather than grand confessions. Once, after a careless remark from a coworker, he paused instead of laughing it off. He stepped outside, placed a hand on his chest, and took 3 slow breaths. The box quivered, then grew warm and steady, as if reassured it had been heard. When he returned, his smile felt less like armor and more like a genuine choice. He started noticing the difference between reacting and responding. Before, emotions had rushed through him like water through a broken dam. Now they moved more like a tide, still powerful, but predictable, even meaningful. Sometimes he imagined setting the box down beside him rather than carrying it everywhere. The image alone eased the weight in his shoulders, a quiet permission to rest. There were setbacks, of course, days when old habits snapped back into place. He'd catch himself clenching, breath shallow, fingers gripping the imaginary lid again. But instead of scolding himself, he'd soften, as the woman had taught him. "Easy," he'd murmur, half smiling at the tenderness of the word. The box responded each time, stabilizing as though trust were slowly being rebuilt. Gradually, the humming that once filled his nights faded into a gentle presence. Not gone, just calmer, like a companion who no longer needed to shout. He began to sense that emotions weren't obstacles to peace but pathways toward it. The realization felt fragile, something to carry carefully in open hands, and he wondered how this quiet shift would hold when life tested him out in the open. The test came on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that usually slipped by unnoticed. A harsh message blinked on his phone, words sharp enough to sting even through glass. His chest tightened, the box vibrating with a familiar urgency. For a split second, the old impulse returned. Ignore it, bury it, pretend it meant nothing. Instead, he set the phone down and placed his palm gently over his heart. He named what rose inside him, quietly, like speaking to a startled animal. "Hurt," he whispered. Then after a pause, and maybe a little anger too. The act felt disarmingly simple, almost too small to matter. Yet the box steadied, its heat spreading outward rather than building pressure. He noticed his breath deepening on its own, as if his body trusted the new approach. When he finally replied, his words were calm, neither defensive nor apologetic. He didn't explain everything or hide behind politeness, just spoke honestly. The conversation softened, not because he controlled it, but because he wasn't fighting himself. For the first time, connection felt like something built on presence, not performance. Even if the other person didn't fully understand, he remained steady inside. Later, he met a friend who joked about how unbothered he always seemed. He almost laughed, remembering the nights spent wrestling invisible weight. Instead, he admitted gently that he'd been learning to listen to himself more. The friend grew quiet, then nodded with a relief that needed no explanation. It struck him that honesty often opens doors others were too afraid to touch first. Walking home, he sensed the box resting lightly, no longer fused to his ribs. It moved with him, not against him, like something finally in step. Streetlights flickered on, casting a warm glow that felt oddly symbolic. He realized peace didn't isolate him from the world. It made room for deeper belonging. Still, a quiet question lingered about how this understanding might help others find their own way. Some evenings, he would sit by the window and imagine someone else carrying a box of their own. Not as heavy as his once felt, perhaps, but humming in that familiar, restless way. He wondered how many people walked past him each day holding invisible weight. The thought no longer made him sad, just quietly compassionate. If he could speak to them, he'd probably start with something very simple. He practiced what he might say, testing the words as though they were delicate glass. "Pause for a moment," he murmured once, watching his reflection in the darkened pane. "Notice what you're feeling, even if it doesn't make sense yet." The box warmed gently, as if approving of the kindness in his tone. He realized that naming a feeling was like turning on a light in a cluttered room. Sometimes he placed both feet on the floor and took one slow breath in, then out, not forcing calm, just allowing space for whatever was already there. He imagined loosening the lid of the box a fraction with each exhale. Nothing dramatic happened, yet a quiet steadiness always followed. It was the sort of practice no one would notice, which made it easy to return to. He even tried whispering, "It's okay to feel this," when old discomfort resurfaced. The words felt awkward at first, like speaking a language he'd forgotten, but over time they softened the sharp edges of fear and shame. The box would hum in a low, almost contented tone, no longer frantic. He began to trust that acceptance could be as gentle as a hand resting on a shoulder. Looking out at the scattered lights in distant windows, he felt a quiet connection. Somewhere, he imagined, others were learning the same quiet skill, not conquering their feelings, just sitting beside them without flinching. The idea carried a warmth that spread through his chest like slow sunrise, and he sensed that this small practice was preparing him for something deeper still. By the time spring touched the trees, he no longer asked when the box would disappear. He understood now that it was never meant to vanish, only to be carried differently. Some days it felt light as folded cloth, other days dense as wet sand. Either way, he stopped measuring his peace by its weight alone. Instead, he noticed how gently he could hold it without bracing for impact. He often returned to the park bench, though the old woman was rarely there. Still, her quiet presence lingered in the way he breathed and listened inward. When difficult feelings surfaced, he greeted them like travelers with stories to tell. The box would warm, settle, sometimes even grow still enough to forget for hours. He realized wisdom hadn't replaced pain. It had made room for it to rest. What surprised him most was how compassion began to spill outward. When others spoke sharply or withdrew into silence, he sensed the boxes they hid. He didn't rush to fix them or offer clever words. Often he simply stayed, steady and open, the way someone once had for him. Strangely, that quiet presence seemed to ease more than advice ever could. On certain evenings, he imagined setting the box down and opening it fully. Inside, there was no chaos, no darkness waiting to swallow him whole. Only layers of memory, tenderness, and strength woven together. Pain had not been his enemy. It had been a teacher without a gentle voice. Acceptance had translated its lessons into something he could finally understand. As he walked home beneath a sky wide enough for every unspoken feeling, he sensed that peace wasn't a distant destination after all. It was the space he created whenever he allowed his heart to be honest. The box rested quietly, no longer demanding, simply belonging. And the path ahead felt open, as if this was only the beginning of a deeper freedom.